A very good evening, everybody. Namaste, and thank you for coming for this fundraising event by Cuts International. Cuts is turning 43 this year, or Cuts has turned 43 this year. And we have the founder and also the current Secretary General, that is Pradeep S. Mehta. First I'll invite him to the dais, followed by our also the chair and a guest of honor, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament, Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, and also our host. And Dr. Tharoor would be in conversation with Mr. Parikshit Luthra. He is Chief of Bureau, CNBC 18. With further ado. Before not wasting further time, may I request Mr. Pradeep Mehta to deliver the welcome remarks.
Thank you, Puru. And with that, let me add to Puru's warm welcome to all of you to this evening. And we hope we have chosen a topic which is very current, and particularly, as somebody pointed out to me, Shashi is an opposition MP. I said he's the only opposition MP who's sensible. And he's a very old friend, so I can take liberties with him. He also is helps us, he mentors our work as well from time to time. He's also a distinguished fellow at Cuts International. And so I'm very pleased to have you here, Shashi, to deliver what is one of its type of an event that we are hoping to do by such an event to fundraise, particularly after the kind of shenanigans which Trump is engaged in. A lot of our funding opportunities have shrunk or have been deleted. Let me not go into the details about it. It's not only the US funding but also European funding, because of the fact is that he is pressing on Europe to move their money from ODA to defense. And the latest commitments which these European nations have made at the NATO will make it more and more difficult for development aid and also humanitarian aid, which is another problem, which has an impact on us also, because even our traditional donors like Gates, Ford, and so on, are shifting a lot of their funding to fill up the gap what US aid is leaving behind. Naturally, those are more important issues. Having said that, let me recall the journey of Cuts since the last 43 years. It began out of a wall newspaper called Gram Gadar, which means Village Revolution, which we started in Jaipur in 1983. And we were lucky to get the blessings of opposition leader at that time, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He had come for electioneering in Alwar district of Rajasthan, and I happened to be there when I got him to inaugurate the first issue that we launched. And we've been in touch with Vajpayee since long, one of the best prime ministers we ever had, and probably, I don't know whether we'll be ever able to have people like him back at the helm, Shashi, something which you wrote recently. The kind of democracy that we are now facing, the way Parliament is being treated is something which really... Now, the wall newspaper then led to the birth of a consumer movement, because at that point of time, it was a socialist era. Everything was in short supply. You could not get a telephone line also to function and so on. That we decided to set up a consumer organization, particularly when things were in short supply, they were in black market, or you needed some approach, somebody to help you to get whatever you got. Even an LPG cylinder was at a premium. Everything was in difficult times. And that is the time when we started this organization. in order to promote and protect consumers' rights. Now, let me cut the long story short. In 1991, I was attending a World Consumer Congress in Hong Kong, and at that point of time, the World Trade Organization discussions were going on very strenuously, I would say. What was then called the Uruguay Round. Nobody knew that it was going to be the World Trade Organization. Whatever that has come out at that point of time. And from the Global South, we were very few members of the Consumers International, which organized this World Congress, who had little understanding about what this monster is going to be. And that led to us to approach a German foundation in Delhi called Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and we spoke to them that, look, this is what is happening in the global era, that there's a new international trade agreement which is going to come up, and that would mean winners and losers both. And how do we deal with that kind of issues that we need to focus? By 1995, the WTO had arrived. We fortunately had very good officers in the Commerce Ministry at that time who were great support to our work that we were doing. And they understood the value of what civil societies can bring, unlike over time when things were quite different. But having said that, one realization that we had, and where we have struck a mark in the global economic history, is on competition law and policy. You say, look, if countries are liberalizing, then they need a regulator. The market has to be regulated. You cannot have an unregulated market which will leave consumers as well as businesses in peril. And that is what happened, and that is the time when we got into the issue of competition law and policy. And we have the proud privilege of having worked in over 30 developing countries in the world, including in India, to draft a new competition law. The 2002 Competition Act in India is, speaking modestly, much of our effort. And thanks to then Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha, who understood what it means. We had a competition law earlier called the Monopolies and Restricted Trade Practices Act, but that was a licensing law rather than a law which regulated the market properly. And that is something which we found that it is something which sort of results in all-round welfare, not only consumer welfare, but business welfare also, particularly small and medium enterprises. So with that kind of realization, we have been spreading ourselves, and we felt very happy when donors approached us to do work in this particular area. For example, we set up a center in Geneva that your voice is heard in Geneva, but a physical presence will make a lot of difference, which is what we did. And since then, we have expanded overseas. Hanoi, 3 centers in Africa, another one in Washington. Now, with all that, what is happening now is, as I speak today, something with which Shashi is closely associated, is the World Trade Organization itself is under some kind of siege. It is in ICU because of the fact is that the US is playing its own games, and I'm sure you're going to hear more about it from Shashi when he speaks, because every other day we keep on hearing about new things which Trump says, and it just sort of flummoxes you. You don't know what he's meaning. I don't think he even understands what he's doing. Having said that, what we did realize was that there is a need to resuscitate the WTO, because as the only effective multilateral instrument in the world, which was very effective, has been very effective, except the fact is that the dispute settlement system, which is what was the crown in the jewel, the jewel in the crown, has been put in abeyance by the US government for not approving the members of the appellate body for the last 10 years now, I think, or maybe around that time. Yet, what is a mistaken fact by many of you here, educated crowd particularly, they feel that the WTO is dead. The WTO is not dead. WTO is doing a lot of things which we may not even know about. A lot of things which are of benefit to the people at large. We have just established, following an event we did in Geneva on the 17th of September, where we collected a lot of middle power ambassadors and leaders, including Veena Jha from India. She was going to be here. To speak about the fact is, what is it that, there, I talk about Veena and there she is. Harsh, welcome. Veena, welcome. I just mentioned your name about our 17th September event in Geneva, which then led to this establishing an international project which can look at the winners and losers of the WTO system. What little is happening is you only talk about winners, you don't talk about losers. Now, in any system, there will be winners and losers. So with that, we have set up a global initiative called TRANSA, Trade, Not Just Aid, with Shashi as the chair and Pascal Lamy as the co-chair of this particular initiative. And we hope to be able to get some mileage out of it, especially reach out to the educated intelligentsia that the WTO is not dead, and we need the WTO for the sake of multilateralism, something which our Honorable Prime Minister has spoken again and again. And with that, let me welcome you all once again, and to hand over the mic to Parikshit. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mehta, thank you so much for putting the perspective and the history of Cuts International so well for our audience. And we're really thankful to you and Cuts for the kind of work they've done in amplifying India's voice over the last 4 decades, not just within the country, but also in multilateral organizations. And I completely agree with you that the WTO cannot be in ICU forever, because what Donald Trump has done by being inward looking, by instigating tariff wars against friends and foes alike, is that he's forced countries like India to go further towards multilateralism. And we have to engage everyone. We've been left with no choice. So this is something that India has historically been doing, and we've been pushed further towards that. But thank you very much to everyone in the audience for joining us. Mr. Tharoor, we're joined by a stellar audience full of diplomats, trade experts, officials from the Ministry of Commerce, students, so you name it. So I won't waste more time, and let me begin with this straight question. And you've really seen changes in the US-India relationship this year. We saw that on 1st of April when Trump imposed the reciprocal tariff. Many would say, yes, we saw that coming. Then we saw the change in stance of the United States towards India post-Operation Sindoor. The period has been full of volatility. Where do we stand? Has India emerged victorious, resilient, strong, despite all the hiccups in the US-India relationship this year?
That's too simple a question to answer, I'm afraid, because it's victorious. No, we're not in a war. We are navigating turbulent waters, and I would say that that's not the term to use, but certainly we could talk in terms of resilience, which we've effectively demonstrated. I will say that if you were to look at all that's happened this year, the guiding principle has been its unpredictability. I don't think that to call 25% reciprocal was entirely fair, because reciprocal implies that we had levied 25%. In fact, the average tariffs that India had imposed on American goods was closer to 12. So 25 was not reciprocal, it was double. But then when that 25 became 50, it made a whole lot of goods unviable. And as I pointed out, we've already seen the impact on our exports in September and October figures, and November figures are out now. There is no question in my mind that real Indian laborers, workers, and companies have suffered as a result of these tariffs. I read a figure of 130,000 gem and jewelry workers in Surat being laid off this year. There have been very strong reports of possibly some garment textile factories in Tirupur having to shut down. In Visakhapatnam, 80% of the marine and shrimp exports were going to America. I mean, that is their market, was 80% of their products was America. That's obviously become unviable. And leather goods from UP have suffered terribly because essentially we're talking about low margin businesses, labor intensive, and we are essentially in fields where other countries are also competing. And these other countries, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh even, are all between 15 and 19%. I think one of those that I mentioned is 20, but that's about it. So whenever any Indian exporter is competing with any of those, with companies from any of those countries, they're immediately facing a minimum 6 to 10% premium at the 25 level. At the 50 level, they're totally unviable. And this is why until we actually have a trade deal, which is signed off on the dotted line, and that will see a dramatic drop back to some viable figure between 15 and 19, I don't think honestly that we can speak in terms of anything to celebrate on that front.
Absolutely. And that indeed is a worry, because currently at a rate of 50%, tariffs of our competing nations are possibly 30% lower, and they do have an advantage over us in labor-intensive exports. I'd like to ask you about the status of the trade deal, and I'll take off from where the Commerce Secretary left today. He was asked about the status of the trade deal. He said that we are close to a framework agreement, but I cannot give a timeline. Where do you think the problem lies? Even Jamieson Greer, the USTR, has said that India has given us the best offer ever as a country.
I think the problem lies in the White House, to put it very bluntly, because as far as I've understood, on multiple occasions, some people say 3 times, some people say 5 times, the 2 delegations have actually come to an agreement, and it's been rejected at the White House. So ultimately what Mr. Trump wants, only Mr. Trump knows. And I think, there will certainly be some red lines on our side where we cannot oblige them. And in a democracy, politics is an important factor. The farm interests of our farmers are not a negligible factor. 67% of our population still lives off the land. You can't put them in a position where, for example, they're swamped by wheat imports from America, to give you an example. There are some areas in which perhaps we could show some greater flexibility. Our objections to GMO, I mean, if 2 generations of Americans have grown up without having their health affected by GMO organisms, do we want to be, holier than them? I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert. All I'm saying is there are some areas where we have to. You remember in the first term, there was this entire controversy over Harley-Davidson motorcycles. I think Mr. Trump pointed out that we had a 350% tax or something on Harley-Davidson, tariff on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And therefore they were selling a grand total of 83 motorcycles a year or whatever. And Mr. Modi wisely, I think, surrendered on that one and reduced the tariff from 350 to something like 40% or whatever. And Harley-Davidson, instead of selling 83 motorcycles, sold 250 motorcycles. Frankly, big deal. No one has suffered as a result. Indians haven't lost out. Bajaj is not suddenly staring at losses because there are 250 Harley-Davidsons being sold, or 350, whatever the number is.
It's a very small market anyway.
So, exactly. So some of these things, if you can make Americans happy by removing or dramatically reducing tariffs on American luxury Cadillacs, how many are they going to sell? Who is going to be affected? I think we can think in terms of, aren't Indian manufacturers able to hold their own against this? How many people are they going to lose to these? And I think, honestly, too much of protectionism is not healthy for any growing economy anyway. But then there are things like, for example, if American wheat, which is massively subsidized in America, and of course has economies of large-scale cultivation and so on, if that suddenly floods the Indian market at a time when our MSP, as far as I understand it, is something like 4 times the unit cost of an American bushel of wheat, then what will our farmers do? So, you've got to look at our own realities and the political consequences of the people you're going to cause problems for.
But Mr. Tharoor, there are two views. Is this only now about agriculture and dairy? Trump has got whatever he wanted, but now he's saying, I also want agriculture and dairy as market access? Or is it also about getting some acknowledgement for his intervention during Operation Sindoor? Because many say somehow we have to give him a diplomatic acknowledgement that yes, you had a role in the ceasefire.
Look, on the first one, to be honest, I don't know because I'm not part of the trade delegation. Only the trade delegations know where the sticking points are and what remains to be negotiated. So that if they've told you, if the Commerce Secretary says, I can't give you a date, that means he doesn't have a date to give, or he's not in a position to hint at it. You may remember the Chief Economic Advisor saying 2 months ago that he thought there'll be a trade agreement by the end of November. It hasn't happened. So
now he's talking about March.
So I think we've got to be a little careful in accepting that these things have their own momentum, their own pace, and that's not dictated by us. There are two parties in this business. But as to the question of the trade thing, when I was asked this in Washington when I led a multi-party delegation there, I said, look, India never needed persuading because we signaled from the beginning, the very first strike on the night of 6th, 7th of May, we had signaled that we were not interested in a protracted conflict with Pakistan, that all we were doing was striking in a very precise, targeted way terror sites, that we had been careful enough to avoid striking Pakistani civilian sites, government sites, and even military installations. It was only terror sites. And therefore, had Pakistan chosen not to retaliate, we were done and dusted. Now that Pakistan retaliated, we have to reply, but the moment they'll stop, we'll stop. That was there in the government signaling on each of the 4 days of the conflict. So clearly India didn't need persuading. The moment Pakistan came and said, let's call it off, we called it off. On the other hand, I said, and here I was going out on a limb because I didn't have any sort of briefing from the government on this, but I said, look, we don't know what happened between Washington and Islamabad. So if Mr. Trump played a significant role in getting the Pakistanis to come and sue for peace, then surely as a peace-loving nation, we'd be grateful. And that answer went over happily in Washington, but somehow we haven't found it possible to say that in Delhi. And don't forget that part of this happened during a parliament debate where naturally the government's desire to look and sound tough and so on became a consideration as well. But also because genuinely, as I understood from all my conversations with various echelons of the government, there was never any direct conversation with Mr. Trump, nor was there any threat to use trade to promote peace, nor was there any effort made to sort of tell India, look, we want you to do this or do that. All of this appears to be coming out of somewhere else. We don't know where, but it certainly does not correspond to the records or the experience or the logs maintained by the Indian government at all serious levels. Now, I'm not in the Indian government. I can't claim to have access to any classified information. But my impression is that we were therefore taken aback by a claim that we did not have any basis for verifying.
So finally, what do you think may be a way out? Because they wanted us to stop buying Russian oil, which we've done to a great extent. We're currently only buying from non-sanctioned entities. They wanted us to buy more US energy. India energy imports from the US are up 70% year on year.
Right.
We're buying even more. We've really done whatever the US wanted. We're also holding our ground. What finally can we offer now to America?
No, look, I think first of all, on the question of the oil, as you rightly said, the Americans have sanctioned 2 major Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. And my understanding is that Indian companies did not want to violate sanctions for fear that they could then appear on an American sanctions list. So it's a company-to-company decision. And that is something which has dramatically reduced the input of Russian oil. Oil purchases, I understand, have a 3-month lead time. So we're only really seeing, after September, some of the impact, but the impact is clear and visible, and it's dropping down to negligible amounts. As for increasing purchases from America, that's very clear. And as you know, the minister concerned, Hardeep Puri, has explained and justified this as part of the diversification of sources of supply. We don't want to be excessively dependent on any one source, and therefore being dependent on the on any one country would not have been in our interest, and America is a diversified source. In fact, I'd keep an eye on what's happening in Venezuela. There's something seems to be building up there. Currently, Venezuelan oil is sanctioned. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen, that there were to be some sort of change there, and suddenly a whole amount of Venezuelan oil will come on the market, which will also have a further reduction, a reducing effect on oil prices. So there's a lot going on in the world that we should keep an eye on. Having said all of that, India, as you say, has gone pretty far. And I don't think in any negotiation, any one party, however large the market may be that they offer us, can expect to have everything their way. The word negotiation wouldn't make sense if it was a unilateral set of demands and a unilateral
It has to be a win-win.
set of concessions. Exactly. Both sides will have to feel that they're gaining something out of the process. And clearly for India, we want to restore the American market that has now significantly been affected. And at the moment, it's only about half of our exports because pharmaceuticals have not been affected. Apple iPhones have not been affected. I think many of the automobile parts have so far not been accepted. But the Americans keep threatening to revise all of these things, so they may also be tariffed. But at the moment, they haven't been. So the 50% isn't about half our goods, but those half, that's a significant, a significant amount, given that America has been a $100 billion export market for us.
So, Mr. Tharoor, you made a very important point that yes, we've offered a trade deal in good faith. We want something to be a win-win, which is good for our long-term partnership. But then the question that we're now talking about here, how do we leverage this volatile global order? We want to have a trade deal, but just in case we don't have it, we need to be prepared with our plan B and plan C. And this includes having trade deals with several other nations, making reforms which make our exports more competitive. Trade deal or no trade deal with the US? How do you think we now need to prepare for the future?
Well, all of those things that you mentioned are absolutely indispensable, whether or not we have a good deal with the Americans, because in the long term, there is no alternative to diversifying not only our sources of supply, but our markets. We need to. There are many markets we could have done more to develop, that our private sector could have done more to develop. We could be selling very much more in Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, certainly in Central Asia than we've been doing. Europe now we have an FTA, though people have overlooked the fact that it still has to be ratified by 27 countries. That could take a year. So we don't actually have it in force yet. We've concluded the deal, but it does have to be ratified, and then we're going to end up with I think, a significant impact on Europe. And all of these things are indispensable. Equally, as you said, strengthening our domestic system, both in terms of our own regulatory environment, the way in which our companies have been perhaps in some areas somewhat complacent. They've got to get their act together. We've got to be more robust as an economy in order to be able to hold our own. One of the things we all saw during the China-America summit in Busan was the extent to which the Chinese had leverage that we don't have either with America or with China. Essentially, leverage is vital in any negotiation. So we should not be in a position where 10, 20 years from now, if we are again facing a future American president, any other country's president who wants to be unreasonable to us, that we don't have any leverage with them. So we need to do some very serious strategic thinking about how we can start acquiring leverage in areas of special competence here, and have that capacity that countries will want to come to us and not just the other way around.
Right, and when you speak about leverage, sir, we can't forget about the rare earth magnets. How China has literally held the US to ransom in all those negotiations, and they've got reprieve after reprieve, month after month. If I were to ask you about 2 or 3 reforms that India definitely needs, you're trying to have trade deals with as many nations as possible. You're now trying to have one with Mexico as well, but there would be certain reforms that we need on the domestic front, after which companies abroad will say that yes, there is a trade deal and there is ease of doing business, ease of investment, ease of opening and closing business, and that would help further investments. So From your career experience as a diplomat, as a Minister of State and External Affairs, as a parliamentarian, what are the 2 or 3 reforms that India desperately needs?
No, I think the best people to ask that question to are the business people themselves. And when you talk to them, you get a different set of wish lists. I see the government has undertaken some serious customs reform exercise. That would be very helpful. There have been a lot of complaints about that. I think there's no doubt that what the late Arun Jaitley used to call tax terrorism is still largely, unfortunately, a feature, and that has sadly driven several thousand of our high net worth Indians out to countries like Dubai and Singapore. And that's something that was avoidable and preventable. There is no doubt that tax targets and other such impositions on our officials, plus the old Indian bureaucratic culture of twisting the arms of people in order to fulfill those targets, all that has caused a great deal of practical as well as psychological damage in the ease of doing business area. The government did a very systematic and useful job of killing a lot of laws that were clearly out of date. Every year or so, they've come up with a whole list of laws that they have essentially taken out of force. But they've not done the same or sufficiently to the regulations that are in place, which are not necessarily, they don't have the sanctity of being legislation. But regulations have tied up, as you know, very many businesses and very, very many compliances. The number of compliances required in India for things that in other countries can be done in 2 or 3 days boggles the mind. Too many of our single window clearances aren't really single windows. It becomes a portal. The single window is actually a portal to various other windows. And we really do need to be much more efficient. The irony is that many countries have been more nimble than us in doing some of these things. We don't have to invent or reinvent the wheel. We can actually look at good examples from around us and see why we can't implement those. And there is absolutely no reason why everything requires detailed procedures, every file to be signed by 4 people, all of this stuff. Because that if the second person in the chain is away on leave or sick or assigned to other duties, the file just sits there and takes months before it moves on. Some of those things really can be simplified. I'm told that ease of doing business works better in some sectors and some geographies than it does in the country as a whole. So there's a lot more to be done in that area.
When we speak about the global trade system, yes, it's suffered a lot of setbacks this year. Everyone is thinking for themselves. Countries are becoming more inward looking, and India also has to fend for itself. One thing that one gets a sense of after the volatility in this year is that China is a relationship we're trying to manage, but China does not actually want to see India's rise. US and India are strategic, natural allies, strong democracies, but maybe US does not want to see India becoming the next China as well. In those circumstances, how does India leverage the multilateral order?
Well, China certainly doesn't want to see India doing to it what it did to America. I mean, there's no doubt that they attracted a whole lot of American investment and subsequently technology as well, learned how to use that, leverage it, replicate it, and improve upon it. And now they are running circles around America. I was in Hong Kong recently, and many of the Indian businessmen there are raving about the vast superiority of the Chinese electric cars to the American alternatives available. And that's striking that this has happened. I remember when I was in graduate school in the States nearly half a century ago, professors sneering at the fact that the Chinese couldn't even make a Jeep, that they had to get everything from Russia in those days, talking about the 70s. Different world now. And the Chinese are doing better than pretty much every country in some areas. So yes, I think we have to understand that just as these countries have acquired their strengths, we need to identify which areas we're going to be strong at. We better get strong at them. Whether it's the classic new domains of AI, quantum computing, and so on. Everybody's in that race, but let's face it, we have more brains on this planet than any other country does, because we have the largest population, right? So if you have 17.2% of the world's population, you have 17.2% of the world's brains, let's use them. And that's sadly not being used enough. In fact, I've done a piece which will come out in the Hindu soon this month, which essentially observes that despite having 17% of the world's brains, we only produce 2.7% of the world's research output, and patent applications as low as 1.8%. We are something like 47th or 48th in the global rankings in terms of applications per 100,000 population and so on. So we have a long way we can improve in all of this, no doubt about it. But we need to identify, and this is where perhaps the government's capacity to identify champion industries, they can also identify champion sectors and say, these are the areas in which we will incentivize, we'll give tax breaks, we'll give other things in order to have India develop a capacity that nobody else can rival in such and such fields. And let's see what those are, and let's identify them and get them going.
Right. You spoke about greater export of services, greater export of skilled products or skilled manufacturing exports. But when
skilled labor as well, I think, is going to come up, right?
That's right. Yeah. But also when it comes to labor-intensive manufacturing, that is a huge area of opportunity, be it textiles, be it leather goods, be it apparel, be it furniture. What we've seen in countries such as Vietnam, for that matter, they often set up these committees under the Prime Minister's office, which speed up investments, or which ensure that certain local level laws can possibly be overruled in order to speed up things or get things going. Do you think possibly we need a committee like that in the country, maybe headed by the Prime Minister's office, or maybe by the Cabinet Secretary, which has all the secretaries of Government of India come together on one table to clear up investments with a clear aim that, these are the 50, 60 top companies which we want to attract to India, and we can possibly do that way?
Well, there is an office for the promotion of investments that ought to be doing that already. Whether it needs a greater political clout that comes from association with the PM, I don't know, because certainly when it was, I think, it has a record of having improved investment clearances in recent years. It just needs to be streamlined even further. My larger question is not just about attracting investments. I think it's once they've come in, what do they encounter? We still have serious challenges of the cost of land, the inadequacy of infrastructure, which we're improving. I mean, there's been dramatic, for example, how much better our ports and airports have got in recent years than they used to be, and our highways. But there's still many areas where we're not better, and it's a shame that our electricity grid is still so unreliable in so many places. There's still serious challenges when it comes to some of those basic things that in other countries people can take for granted, even in places like Vietnam and Malaysia, which are also doing labor-intensive work, but they have, according to many foreign businessmen, a more solid domestic infrastructure to facilitate their manufacturing and their exports. I thought you were going in a different direction when you began the question. You're going to talk about skilled labor, and I want to mention that briefly because one of the interesting things we've seen in recent years is the government of India getting more involved in negotiating mobility agreements. And that's both at the professional level, where, for example, the Germans now, I think, have announced 20,000 visas a year for Indian professionals, which is a dramatic. And in fact, when the Trump H-1B announcement came, suddenly the German ambassador was all over the Indian media saying, come to Germany instead. And many have picked up on that sort of thing. So there is that possibility. But equally, there's discussions of mobility at the blue-collar level, because we do have a lot of people who are already at the moment going in an unstructured and frankly dangerous way, often getting entrapped. We've had
Russia,
Indians
Ukraine.
being killed on the Ukraine front, who claimed they had gone for other jobs and found themselves being press-ganged into the war. We've had people going on tourist visas to Thailand and finding themselves suddenly in
Chinese call centers and getting
exactly. Well,
scams
not just
sent.
Chinese. Some of them seem to be run by Indians sitting in Myanmar and Laos and so. I mean, there's a whole set of scams and rackets going on. We ought to do very much better by our own people. I have been calling for some years now for a massive revision of the Immigration Bill of 1983, which was written for a different era, just completely out of date. And the government is coming up with a new draft bill, which I hope will be studied by the public. It's open for public consultations right now. Try and get more people interested in seeing what migrants need by way of protections and help. So that too is something we can be doing. That's one area where certainly nobody can match us,
So, Mr.
is
Tharoor,
in the amount of labor available. But they've got to be capable people.
That's a very important point, because when we speak about H-1B visas, US was the most attractive destination for Indian professionals. Now, the US administration is clearly clamping down on H-1B visas. The fee has been raised to $100,000. The scrutiny has increased. The time taken for clearing visas is increasing by the day. Keeping that in mind, what's going to be the reality staring us in the face at the beginning of next year? We're trying to have such mobility agreements now with Russia and several other partners.
It's difficult to say what's going to happen next year because, Mr. Trump has smashed everybody's crystal ball, I think. We don't know what he's going to decide tomorrow or day after tomorrow.
But do you also think that whatever this administration does, will it change with the next administration?
No, it could even change within this administration. I'll give you one example. There are 31 food items that Mr. Trump has suddenly reduced tariffs on because the MAGA voters going to the supermarkets in America were finding themselves paying more than they wanted to pay for items they were used to buying more cheaply. And Mr. Trump, who's of course got to worry about re-election, but also not his own re-election, but his party and his members' re-election and midterm elections coming up in November of 2026, he very quickly cut down tariffs on these food items. So that's food. Tomorrow it could be something else. There will be other inflationary effects of tariffs. And when that starts biting, there may well be a change of policy. We don't know. I don't think we should assume that everything we're seeing today will be there even before for the duration of the Trump administration. But yes, America has a very interesting polity, which is highly individualized. The president has an outsized influence. I don't think there is a comparable system in any democracy in the world where an individual is able to so dramatically affect policy and to change it almost on a whim. And therefore, we have to accept that anything could happen for the better and for the worse. The political changes in America, again, the composition of the Congress and the Senate, the political fortunes of the president himself, or the movement that he presides over, all of these things are bound to have some sort of variation. So what we've got to do is we've got to be nimble. We have to follow everything, keep our eyes and ears open, talk to these people. You talked about resilience. Resilience also includes a certain amount of adaptability. You can be resilient, but at the same time you can't be rigid in resisting everything that is thrust upon you. Some things you may have to find you need to, tack your sails differently to negotiate these turbulent waters. And I think we have the capacity to do that. We just have to be on the ball all the time.
Right. You spoke about Donald Trump, and today he's speaking about C5. There is US media speaking about how he's thinking about this grouping called the C5, which can be an alternative to the G7. How does India see this? In this context, I'd also like to talk about a development that took place just a few days back. US launched the Pax Silica Alliance, an alliance of countries which India is not a part of, but which will work towards securing supply chains of AI infrastructure, critical minerals, semiconductors, and logistics. So how does India see all these developments, and what do we do with our engagement with multilateral organizations such as the WTO?
Well, first to start off with the US-led initiatives, again, it's very difficult to understand what's going on. And don't forget, Mr. Trump had also talked about reviving the G8 by adding the Russians to the G7. And that was something he talked about openly quite a bit. Now suddenly you're hearing about the C5, and apparently we are one of the countries, but I don't know. I mean, there's no formal move anyway to create or announce any of these things. These seem to be ideas that are being floated about. The Silica Alliance certainly hurts that we're being excluded. I can tell you when I was in the States, India-US collaboration in AI seemed to be very much in the minds of very many very well-placed and highly senior American officials. So I'm surprised that India fell off the list when this is so explicitly linked to strengthening capacities of these countries in AI. So I'm afraid the unpredictability factor we talked about has become apparent across the board in all of these issues. And therefore we don't know if tomorrow there'll be some other initial and some other number. I don't know. That'll come our way. Meanwhile, don't forget there were these earlier announcements. We need to ask what is happening to the Quad. It's our turn to host a summit. We still don't have a date from the Americans for it. There is the question of the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which again the Americans are very keen on, which would have connected us through the Gulf, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, to Israel, port of Haifa, and then on to Europe. Is that on the cards, off the cards, on the back burner, forgotten? Who knows? I mean, when we talk about the unpredictability of some of the decisions coming out of the White House and Washington, it affects all of these things. So it becomes, I think, a mug's game to sit around saying this time next year there'll be ABC, because we don't know. We honestly don't. And that's why I talked about the importance of nimbleness and flexibility. But we shouldn't let go of anything where we feel we could gain. We can gain from IMEC. We can gain from the old I2, U2. Everyone has forgotten about that. That was India, the US, the Emirates, and Israel. Is that going to get off the ground? Of course, with peace in Gaza, it could, but will it? We don't know. I mean, indeed, all of these issues are part of the extremely challenging global landscape today, where there are no fixed, clearly identifiable, predictable features. It is a much more uncertain, much more unpredictable, much more turbulent global landscape. And therefore, when we speak about leveraging, it's about India coming up with developing the capacity to be excellent and indeed indispensable in certain areas, and then being in a position to leverage its indispensability in pursuing its own interests where there are challenges to it. And this is something that is a long-term challenge for us for all time, and certainly longer than Mr. Trump's administration is going to be. But right now we have to live with today's realities and survive the challenges we're facing right now.
Right. You said that we have to be nimble and agile. For 2026, if you feel that there are certain relationships India needs to focus on more than others right now, what would those be which could possibly give us greater results in the future?
Well, Europe definitely, because I think there's been an under exploitation of potential with Europe for some time now. And now that we've actually made progress on the FTA, that's something we could double down upon, because if you're talking about a multipolar world, Europe clearly is a pole. And as a collection of Western democratic countries that have their own challenges with an overweening America, they have more affinities with us than I think we've allowed ourselves to think in the past. We do have good relationships with individual European countries, Germany and France in particular. But with Europe as a continent and as a collectivity, I think there is tremendous potential we have not fully developed. So that's one area. I'm very, very big on Africa. People forget that 8 of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa today. Of course, they're smaller economies, they're doing it from a smaller base than ours, but we ought to be in on the ground floor. The Chinese are, of course, moving in, but the Chinese have their own challenges. They're not universally liked in Africa. They tend to come in very large numbers, and they leave very little. I mean, if the Chinese build a project, everyone from the laborer sort of mixing the cement to the manager supervising the project is Chinese. And they may leave behind a building or a highway, but when they're gone, no one left behind in that country or that country's environment knows how to maintain it, repair it, and so on and so forth. India is very different. When we go in, we will have a sprinkling of, our companies will have a sprinkling of managers, but they'll hire local people, they'll train mid-level managers, intermediaries, and these people then feel that we have contributed to their capacity enhancement as well as helping them build a railway line or a building or whatever else it was. So that's a strength we have. We could do much more with that. And at the same time, of course, trade and business opportunities are colossal. When I was briefly Minister for Africa, I used to make it a point to take Indian business with me on my delegations to African countries, just to give them a chance to realize there's a world out there they haven't actually been exploiting or thinking in terms of dipping their toes into. And I think we need to do much more of that in Africa as well. And finally, Central Asia, which a lot of these economies are doing well. They've got oil money, gas, various other things. We've had connectivity issues because Pakistan is in the way, and that has certainly impeded to some degree how much we can do with Central Asia. We have to find workarounds and try and develop those markets and those relationships. Right. Tremendous amount of potential in some of the stans that we ought to be looking at.
My one final question would be regarding China. We've had a adversarial relationship. We've gone through a difficult time in the relationship over the last 5 to 6 years. We've been trying to stabilize so that there are no more surprises in the relationship. But how do we leverage a relationship with China? Can we leverage it at all for our advantage? Because we are dependent on Chinese imports. We need them for our export competitiveness, for our national security, our economic security. How do we somehow negotiate or work with China so that our growth also continues, yet the relationship is fairly stable?
The relationship can be stable. The difficulty is what is the presumption behind it? I mean, there are segments of the business community. I've had a number of conversations with fairly influential business voices who are strongly advocating a surrender to China, as it were. Let them come in, let them invest, remove the restrictions on their coming into certain sectors of our economy. How does it matter? They're next door, we have to work with them. Plus they're so much cheaper, so much better. They can give us everything we need. Even the things, the machines we need to manufacture stuff we export, we get from China more than anywhere else, etc., etc. On the other side, the argument is more from the strategic community, which is deeply worried about the vulnerabilities that our business community seems to be keen on pushing us into. For example, I mean, you talk about China leveraging rare earths with the Americans, they leverage them with us.
They've not released anything.
They took away rare earths from us in ways that genuinely hurt us. But even simple things like the tunnel boring machines we've been using for our highway development and tunnel construction. The technology is originally German, but it's a German company in China that makes these tunnel boring machines. The Chinese have just stopped selling them to us. And suddenly we find ourselves in a position where we literally have a colossal shortage of these machines when we need them for our own infrastructure development. Now I'm hearing fairly well-placed, reliable sources indicating that we may have persuaded the German company concerned to put up a factory in India, not just in China. But that'll take time to come on stream, and so in the meantime we are suffering. Another startling example many people weren't aware of for some time is that the Chinese, even at a time when we were being tough on visas for China, when the Foxconn project came in that was making all the Apple 17s and all of that, 300 of their engineers and technicians, including supervisory ones, were Chinese citizens. And China just unilaterally snapped their fingers and said, leave India. And suddenly we had a massive hole when it comes to 300 jobs that were indispensable. Now, I mention all of this to show that China has not only exercised leverage over us already and has reminded us that they have that leverage, but they've done so in a fairly unfriendly manner. And many people say, why would you want to enhance your vulnerability to a country that has already behaved in a manner that is like this? On top of that, we've had Galwan and the border issue, which is still unsettled. It's the world's longest unresolved frontier dispute. The Chinese are clearly not making any effort to resolve it. I know that Mr. Doval, as the special representative of India, has been meeting his Chinese counterpart twice already in the last 3 months, and hopefully there might be some further progress. I'm told that one more meeting is coming up in the intermediate future. If anything, positive results out of that, I think we'll all be happy. But the Chinese have broadly taken the line that we should leave the border to future generations to settle. The problem is, since they said it, their economy has become 4 times the size of ours, their military is twice the size and capacity of ours, and by the time you leave it for a future generation, China might even be planning to be in a position to just dictate terms of a settlement. So that's not good enough for us. We really want this monkey off our back by settling in one way or the other an agreement that at least removes a cause or an opportunity for China to constantly throw us off balance. And this is something worth thinking about, and I think we do need to do that. The relationship stability is not so much in question, that I don't think China at the moment would want to rock the relationship through anything more than it's already doing. It is probing into the existing lines on the border. It is parking durable facilities in areas where both countries used to patrol. It is doing things like refusing visas to Indians born in Arunachal or Kashmir and instead giving them staple visas and separate pieces of paper. There have been a number of irritants coming out of China, but within an overall context of nothing more fundamentally destabilizing. Now, so when you ask stable relationship, yes, it can be a stable relationship. But I ask you in turn, what is your orientation? Do you see China as a country that is fundamentally hostile to your basic core national interests? In which case you have to make your economic and other choices guided by that perception. Or have you decided that no, a policy of capitulation is better for us because we'll prosper from it? I am not inclined in the latter direction. My views are fairly well known. But there are enough voices in India to advocate that point of view. I might add one more detail, which I think all of you are very conscious of, which is that now Pakistan has also become a very significant consideration in China's attitude to India, much more so than before. It's not just that China has become an ally and a friend for the last half a century. That's always true. But what has been significant is that the single largest project under the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And don't forget that till 10 years ago, Chinese goods going to Western China had to come from the Straits of Hormuz or the Suez Canal all the way around India, through the Straits of Malacca, into the South China Sea, and they'd unload in Guangzhou or Shenzhen, be loaded on trucks, and then taken on highways all the way across mainland China before goods could reach Western China. Today they're saving 95% of the time and 90% of the cost by just going down to Gwadar, unloading and going up the highway. This is now a fundamental Chinese national interest. It's no longer about using Pakistan to needle India or a strategic calculus in the old Sino-Soviet clash or anything else. It is now directly about Pakistan is good for us if we are Chinese, and Pakistan being bad for India is an incidental thing. But we've all heard the stories about Sindoor, and I'm not revealing anything confidential because I don't know. But I've read the same newspaper reports, and many of you have access to if you go and search for them, that the Chinese satellites hovering above India were giving real-time intelligence to the Pakistanis during the war. And there are even stories, unverified undoubtedly, of Chinese officers in some of the Pakistani command and control centers giving some of those, feeding some of that satellite data into the trigger mechanisms that sent various kinds of missiles our way. Now, as I say, I have no authority to confirm any of this, but even if it's true, or even if it's only partially true, that's already a pretty worrying indication of where the fundamental interests of the two countries diverge. Right. So you can talk about a stable relationship, but a stable relationship in the context of understanding what your fundamental national interests are and how they are seen by the other side is something you always bear in mind in any mature relationship.
You know, I think I would really sum up what you've said, sir, with the fact that we have to be nimble-footed, agile in our responses, look out for our interests wherever we can, be it in the relationship with China or US, and draw your red lines very, very strongly and be clear about that.
And go into any relationship with your eyes wide open.
Absolutely.
And that's China, that's America, that's anyone else. Ultimately, know yourself, develop your strengths is an important part of that too. If you have your own strengths, then at bottom, there'll be a limit to how much damage others can do, even if they want to.
Okay. So I know there are a lot of questions from the audience, Mr. Tharoor, so we'll open it up. So we'd love to have some questions. All right. Can we get some mics there? And sir here wants to ask a question. Can you please bring a mic?
So thanks for a fascinating exposition. I just had two possible conundrums that we are. I mean, you rightly stated how uncertain, how volatile, weaponization of tariffs, weaponization of trade, ideologies evaporating. Under these circumstances, does this notion of India being a leader of the global south somehow come in conflict with a more issue-based stand that is there? That's the first one. Second is the possible synchronization of the bilateral, the regional and the multilateral. Is it possible in today's world, or what would you advocate, that you have one way could be it's a step-by-step approach. So I do what I can in bilateral regionals, I leave the multilateral. The other way is, should we have a more synchronized policy, whether it's the WTO, whether it's other. So these are the two conundrums I thought I will leave you with.
Right. Well, they're very serious conundrums. I think we want to start with the second. Obviously, bilateral relationships have their own logic, and very often they trump any other imperatives emerging from regional or global fora. So the bilateral relationships have always to be seen in their own terms where an issue arises bilaterally. But having said that, there are not only bilateral issues in the world. There are issues that have specifically regional resonance, and there are issues that have transregional, or what one might call plurilateral significance. The Quad is an example, where you've got 4 countries, 3 of which are from our part of the world, but 1 of which is the US, making common cause on issues that transcend the national borders of each. Or if you take some of the other multilateral groupings that you were alluding to, we actually have a relevant role to play. And that ties into the earlier question about the Global South, because you're quite right that there are challenges in trying to portray ourselves as the unquestioning leader of the Global South. After all, Mexico is a member of the Global South, and they just slapped us with 50% tariffs. And in those circumstances, where is the Global South solidarity there between Mexico and us? Having said that, for a lot of smaller countries in the South, they actually do welcome a significant player of some size who identifies with them and whom they can identify with, speaking for them. I mean, I've spoken to leaders of some small countries, for example, and they do look up to India as a significant voice. I think our performance over COVID, when we sent vaccines to a number of very small countries, elicited a lot of gratitude. It may not have made a fundamental difference to the overall health of the entire population. The quantities were modest, but at the same time, the fact that we did it, no one else was doing it. The Western countries are busy stockpiling their own vaccines, and they ended up throwing most of them away because they had 3 or 4 times more than they could actually use during COVID. We instead sent vaccines to these countries, and these are the sorts of things that I think have given us some legitimate street cred as a leader of the Global South. And I am not at all against us doing that. Maybe we shouldn't do it with any chest thumping. We should do it with a certain amount of modesty and receptivity to what they want us to advocate for them. But one of the things we must never forget is how in the 1950s and early 60s, or right up to the 62 war anyway, we punched above our weight in the global system at a time when our economy was doing very badly, our military was weak, we didn't have any of the conventional indices of power, but our global diplomacy was so impressive. We punched above our weight because we were the country that was the go-to country for every crisis around the world. We were, India was turned to the first Laos crisis, the first Vietnam crisis, the first Korean crisis. We were indispensable in resolving the Suez crisis. There is a lot to be said for our ability to leverage our international credentials and our diplomatic skills on that global platform. I've often argued that from everything from cyberspace to outer space, India actually has something to contribute that very, very few countries in the world do, and very few or none in the Global South can do. So why are we so reticent? Why don't we come up and start being a major voice for creating global consensus on some of the issues to do with outer space, some of the issues to do with cyberspace, whatever it may be. We have the skill, we have the talent, we have the expertise, and we have the track record of global credibility. I think we should use it. So I'm not prepared to write off the multilateral advantages thereof. But I agree with you totally. Bilateral is hugely important, and where one comes into conflict with the other, we may have to take a very hard and sensible call on the basis of the real issues at stake. A bilateral relationship with the US, for example, may be more important to us than a plurilateral arrangement or even a multilateral one. But on the other hand, if it's with a smaller country with less of an impact on us, we may say, no, for us it's more important to remain a credible global voice than to surrender our credibility in a bilateral deal. It will have to take a call case by case.
Right. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm Shresh. I'm a columnist. First of all, thank you.
Please also have the mic for the young lady there on this side. Please go ahead.
Sure. So thank you, Parikshit, for being the wonderful moderator, and thanks, Shashi, for your insights. We have spoken about plurilateralism, India's position in the international system, but I'm tempted to go back to the title, India's journey towards Viksit Bharat. And my concern is the vehement hypocrisy or tragedy, for lack of a better word. What Viksit Bharat are we referring to, and how do we plan to materialize it when the parliament somehow deems it fit to debate Vande Mataram for nearly 10 hours, when the national capital has turned into a gas chamber, right? Like, when they should be looking after the issue at war scale. I mean, going back to your words, we do have 17% of the brains, but what are we doing to harness them, when they are forced to queue at the pulmonologists, So, yeah, just curious.
Yeah, so I mean, to begin with, you're asking the wrong guy, because you've got to ask those who came up with the phrase, and those are the government of the day. I'm in the opposition. So, but having said that, I think having an aspiration is always laudable. And so having a phrase like Viksit Bharat and a target date like 2047, I think is not at all a bad idea to target minds. I personally would not hold my breath to achieve a universally acceptable Viksit situation by 2047. But at the same time, I'd like to feel that there is a sense of aspiration that we're driving towards some sort of target. What does it consist of? Again, ask the government, but I don't disagree with you that it's got to cover things like the horrendous air pollution in Delhi. It's got to cover infrastructural issues, what I sometimes describe as both the software and the hardware of development. The hardware of development are the ports, the airports, the highways, the railways, which by and large the government is focused on, and we seem to be making good headway on. But the software of development, whether it's clean air to breathe, whether it's decent sanitation, whether it's clean drinking water in sufficient quantities, reliable electricity for every Indian, but even more important, a healthcare facility, a clinic at the very least within a reasonable walk of your place of residence for every Indian citizen, a decent school to send your children to, and a decent job where you can work and save and aspire to a better future for your children. This is all what I would call the software of development. It's not the hard, measurable, visible things, but the intangible things that actually give you the sense of being in a developed country. And to my mind, all of those are as important to a feeling of what Viksit Bharat is all about. And as long as we and every Indian citizen can take those for granted, I frankly don't care how much better the Chinese or anybody else are doing. Let them all flourish. The world is a large enough place. But let's create a decent life for every Indian, and that's something that we should be working towards.
One more question. Yes, you had a question?
So basically, we all might know about the increase in taxation in cigarettes recently. We have seen a sin tax of 40%. But sir, BDs have gotten a tax cut instead of around 18% if my memory serves me well. But sir, if we see the consumption patterns of tobacco, BDs and cigarettes have a 8:1 ratio, and signifying that the lower economic class mostly prefers BDs, and that is the consumption of tobacco in India. So sir, do you think the government's aspirations and actions are misplaced when they say that cutting down on cigarettes and foreign cigarettes by having taxation will immediately decrease the consumption of tobacco overall in India?
No, you're probably quite right that it won't, but the truth is that government policy is not just about discouraging consumption. Think of how many people are employed in the BD industry, and whether the government feels that by punitive taxation, they might be doing more damage to the livelihoods of large numbers of people than they would be doing to the lungs of those who actually buy those BDs. I mean, that's a policy question that the government of the day has to take a call on. But in all fairness, consistently, all governments in independent India have essentially protected BD workers, and there's been political pushback when they seem to be taking punitive steps against them. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you that if tobacco is bad in a foreign cigarette, it's also bad for you in a BD. But the truth is that the imperatives are different. Taxing Marlboro is not going to hurt anybody in India, and it'll bring some extra revenue to the government. Taxing BDs might actually cause unemployment, stress, and political consequences. So think of policy as partially involving some notions of virtue and desirable conduct and so on, but also think of it as, in a democracy, being linked very much to votes, livelihoods, and the lives of the voters.
So just to follow up, sir, so do you think the government has practically disguised its intentions? Basically, they're trying to obviously empower the rural livelihood, but they're also trying to have a good face in the parliament.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of questions right now, so let me just get in. Sir has one question. So should we do one thing? if you allow, we'll take 2 or 3 questions and then you can address them.
This is a very distinguished parliamentarian, so let's hear him right
I
away.
just wanted to add to the young girl that recently in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, there was bill passed by putting 30% cess on this tobacco and pan masala to mop up funds for health and all that. But anyhow, my question to you is, we are focusing so much on the Indo-US. What is your take on de-dollarization of the dollar or whatever? Because the moment we talk this thing in BRICS, the next thing Mr. Trump on his breakfast says, no, I will chase these guys to
He said 100% tariffs on any country.
Yes. And secondly, related to this is the rupee is depreciating, almost touching 91. So, okay, it may help little bit, some exporters, whatever. But what is your take on de-dollarization? Will it happen? Will we see the light of the at the end of tunnel? And whether this 91, or what is your take on this balancing our heavy imports versus minuscule positive impact on exports?
I don't think that any country would be crazy enough to officially announce a policy of de-dollarization. Simply because the political consequences with the American relationship will be so catastrophic. No one is going to say we are in favor of de-dollarization. And in fact, India was quick to respond to Mr. Trump's statement by saying that, that we have never advocated de-dollarization. But we are, however, quietly doing things like ruble-rupee trade. We're doing ruble-real trade with Iran. Rupee-real trade with Iran. We are quite willing to go into trade in local currencies to bypass some of the challenging effects of sanctions on these countries. So far, this has only happened with sanctioned countries. So countries that are not undergoing sanctions, we are trading through all the conventional methods. We still buy oil in dollars and all of that stuff. But when it comes to both Russia and Iran, we have been quite willing to discuss trade deals in local currencies. But that's, whether you call that de-dollarization, you kind of call that a pragmatic accommodation to today's realities. I think we are likely to do that much without actually subsuming it under a global policy of de-dollarization, which frankly would just make us an enemy in Washington we can ill afford. So I don't think we're going to do that. On the second question of the rupee, I think, your guess is as good as mine. There's clearly been some international market forces in the foreign exchange markets that have driven the rupee down. What is striking is that it's gone down against the dollar at a time when the dollar has been going down against the Swiss franc, the euro, the pound, and other currencies. So the dollar is not doing well internationally, except against the rupee. So there is some question as how much of this is deliberately managed policy. I know I've had some exporters explain to me that when there's a percentage increase, as it were, in what their goods have to cost, it helps that by the time the dollars are sent to India in rupees, they've made up a certain percentage thanks to the depreciation of the rupee. I'm not sure that, I haven't done the maths or not. Each day the figure seems to change anyway. I'm not sure whether one totally offsets the other. But my own feeling is that there is certainly an element of export protection behind the willingness to let the rupee slip. But it can't, go on slipping forever, because there are other considerations, including the fact that anything you import becomes so much more expensive than it used to be. And that is an issue at a time when you're going to be importing more from countries like America. So I think at some point we'll have to have that re-examined. But at the moment, I find that it hasn't been as controversial, except amongst opposition political parties. It hasn't been as controversial as I expected amongst the business community or others. Every business person with an international outlook is going to be spending more rupees for every dollar he or she has to get. So how come they haven't made more of a fuss or more of a noise? I don't know, but they haven't.
All right, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all those who have contributed to this fundraising dinner as well. And particularly Vikramjit Singh ji has contributed a very handsome amount. And that is why I would like to publicly acknowledge it and also encourage others that, if they can loosen their purse strings, we'll be very happy.
All right.
Veena.
Yes, please go
So
ahead,
I have a
ma'am.
question. Can I please ask my question?
Yeah, sure. We can just take one from ma'am as well. Please go ahead and then we'll take
So
one from
what are your insights on President Putin's recent visit to India? And how do you think the Indian-Russian alliance will emerge in the volatile global order?
No, it's not an alliance. In fact, India is quite allergic to the word alliance. Even when Parikshit talked about natural ally, I was going to say, no, natural partner. But we have partners, not allies. It's like somebody who's a serial dater but not getting into marriages. That's more or less the Indian approach to this. So, but anyway, I will tell you that from what I gather, the most significant element of the Putin visit would probably show up in trade relations of various kinds. That is, that Indian goods going to the Russian market, which actually we are selling less today to Russia than we did in 1992. Because when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia became free, they suddenly opened up to the West and the West opened up to them, and they lost all interest in buying goods from India. Everything from, chai to sweaters used to come from India. All that suddenly disappeared, and they were getting everything from the West. Now the Western sanctions have meant that a lot of that's not there, and all they've got is now Chinese goods. So they've suddenly become much more receptive to Indian goods. So that's one thing. And the second possibility is Russian exports of some kinds of items to the Indian market. So I think my understanding is that that's the area in which there's been a tremendous amount of progress made. On other areas, I think there was some important sort of reaffirmation of strategic partnership and so on, which is more in the area of geopolitics. But in terms of tangible nuts and bolts, I think you will see a significant uptick in Indian-Russian trade. But don't speak of an alliance. We don't go for alliances. We will certainly, I think we see this as a very positive and time-tested relationship. Yeah.
Ma'am.
Shashi, I wanted you to comment that in a volatile global order, you would expect the UN to be more and more relevant, but it is not so. And that, of course, has to do a lot with the geopolitics. But as an old UN hand, how would you reflect on it?
Well, the UN at the geopolitical level, that is the Security Council on the Maintenance of Peace and Security, I agree in recent years, even for the last decade or so, seems to have become an increasingly less relevant player. And that has again been confirmed in the Gaza peace deal. They passed a resolution in the Council, but there is no proposal for the force to be under the UN. It'll be under a board of peace legitimized by the UN, but actually controlled by Mr. Trump and Mr. Blair or something like that. I mean, we'll see the final details, but these are not going to be UN blue helmets on the ground in Gaza. And I suspect that if there's ever a peace in Ukraine, it won't be the UN there either again. So you are looking at a de-emphasis of the UN on issues of international peace and security, which is gravely disappointing to people like me who worked in that domain of the UN for many years and for whom it was really part of the lifeblood of the organization. Conversely, however, the UN as an agenda-setting body and as a forum for convergence of global opinion on various issues remains, I think, unquestioned. You've seen, for example, how even at a time when some American senator from the MAGA movement had introduced a bill in the Senate to withdraw the US from the UN and claimed to have collected a majority of the Senate, 63 or 64 signatures. And Mr. Trump never encouraged him to bring it to a vote, because Mr. Trump actually was happy to go to the General Assembly and make an hour-long speech, almost Fidel Castro style, before this global forum. There is some advantage in having in your own backyard, an hour's flight from your national capital, a forum where the rest of the world comes and pays court to you and listens to you. So I mean, let's face it, that convening power, that role of being a global forum is still very much there. Secondly, a lot of other issues, the UN is the only game in town. It's the only place where every country can come together for whatever issue you want to have convergence of opinion on. Next year's election of a new Secretary General, I think, is worth watching. It is the turn of Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm not sure Mr. Trump will accept any of these conventions, and he or the American administration under his leadership may not go along with it, but for the rest of the world, it's broadly understood that Latin America and the Caribbean will be the source of the next Secretary General. 3 or 4 names already being actively talked about. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. If, for example, we have a Secretary General from a small island developing country who can articulate the needs of the global South in a credible way, the UN could again become a major forum for the developing world in ways that it arguably hasn't been for the last 15, 20 years. So you can see some potential hope out of that. But expecting it to be the organization that will sort of preserve Pax Onusiana around the world. No, that's over, because as long as the big powers don't agree with each other, that role in international peace and security cannot be fulfilled in quite the same way.
Mr. Bansal.
Sir, my name is Rohit Bansal. I can describe myself as your fan and follow for many years. Now, accelerating India's journey towards Viksit Bharat, the man here, the columnist brought to the fore the topic. What is the Indian National Congress's roadmap of accelerating India's journey towards a Viksit Bharat, besides opposing the government and perhaps opposing within itself?
Rohit, I'm not a spokesperson for the party, and I'm sure that a spokesperson could answer that question, because
He's
I'm
a
sure
fellow Stephanian.
I know Rohit well. He's being mischievous to me, which is all right. It's part of his. He's also had his foot in the media, but I will say that, look, obviously the parties in the country have different visions. The Congress and the BJP are the two national parties which have their own visions of how the country should go. Most of the other parties confine their visions to their own states. I mean, they really are much more regional in their focus and orientation. Congress has a national view, and you've heard the leadership of the Congress speaking about these far more than I think I'm authorized to or entitled to do. So I'll pass on that. But I think the target you mentioned of Viksit Bharat is a target that's been announced by the government of India. And no one can demur from the notion that we need to be heading towards that target, whether by that date or another date or whatever, and what the elements it consists of may change. But we all want our country to grow and progress and prosper.
Sir, good evening, sir. What's your view when your party says that Viksit Bharat is only for certain individuals like the Adanis, Ambanis, etc., and the rest of the country is paying a price for that?
No, look, there is a concern about the sort of idea of certain favored, I mean, disparaging term would be crony capitalism. The more positive term would be national champions. But there is a perception that some companies, some industrialists may have been given opportunities to grow much larger than perhaps they might otherwise have done in a less favorable regulatory environment. But at the same time, the vision, the difference between arguing for big companies as national champions versus trying to create a more liberalized playing field for all companies, small and micro enterprises included, that is something where I can't imagine there should be any serious disagreement. We all want, I mean, at a time when unemployment and people generating jobs, frankly, are so unemployment is rife and jobs on the ground are so scarce, you really do need to encourage more and more people to set up businesses and make it easier for them to flourish. I talked about the regulatory obstacles we need to get away from. We need to cut and slash. I mentioned that in the earlier answer. But once we do that, then more small businesses have a chance to be established, to grow and to grow, and to become larger businesses as well. So I think that's the ideological argument that many sort of left of center critics would argue, that some individuals have been favored by the government's policies. The government would argue that having large national champions gives us the capacity to have global reach and global brands and so on. It's a philosophical debate that I'll leave it to others to have. But there is a genuine concern on the part of many Indians that we should really have a more broad-based, liberal policy towards encouraging businesses than one that only favors a few.
You know, there's a lot of interest, sir. You can just see the number of hands. Should we take one final question? Yeah. So, gentleman there. If someone can give him mic.
Well, she also has a mic. So maybe
okay. All right. 2 questions.
Thank you, Parikshit, for allowing me the last. Sir, pleasure hearing you. It's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm slightly out of the crowd. I am a soldier, the former Vice Chief of Army Staff General. Heard you many times earlier, sir. This is very intriguing, sir. You put us thinking on course. Something that's always been a conflict in our mind. And the example, you said it all, I'll say it in just a few sentences. One is that economies have got weaponized today. Whether you say of the CPEC, or you talk of the MPEC in Myanmar, or you talk of the Belt and Road, One Belt, One Road, it's all weaponized. the point I'm trying to make is, Putin's visit, I recall, is not an ordinary visit. It's got a huge content in economy, but the major dynamic is military. The offsets it will give us is what I, in my capacity, have experienced G2G acquisitions with the United States, with Russia as government to government direct sales. But I can say one thing, that sir, to what you added, the close parallel trouble and turbulence that weaponization and the military's cause can derail many of these thoughts. And this is something I just wanted to seek your views. China, sir, is somewhere where, and there's no power in history which was an economic power and did not become a great military power, and vice versa, sir, a military power which did not become a big economic power. And you can take the cycle from the Brits to the Chinese now and what you're saying. So I just wanted your views. Is it right that it is a very big balancing act we have to do, sir? And a balancing act is, I've sat in many discussions with Mr. Menon when he was the Home Secretary and with the Foreign Secretary in many discussions. I used to really then say, and this is for the sharing with you all, which goes first, security or economic or trade? It's a big battle. I wouldn't ever agree with $100 billion deficit with China. What on earth for what they give us? 57 meetings over the LSE, which I have seen every inch of. They are not willing to concede. And sir, in 2 words you had said it, there is no resolution intended. So I think I just thought, that's my view, that it will always be derailed or an attempt to be made to put you down, if not economically, to threaten you, to arm twist you, and bring you to a kind of position where the economic bilateral even will trouble you because of the security dynamic.
You're totally right. I mean, I will stress, however, when you said that, there is no major economy that didn't become a major military power, right? But it's not accurate to say there's no major military power that didn't become a major economy, because Russia, I'm afraid, was a very major military power, the second largest in the world, but a hopeless economy at the moment of its collapse. So you could argue that the syllogism hasn't always worked in both directions. Having said that, our military relationship with Russia, as you rightly said at the beginning of your comment, is very important. At one point we had 78%, I think, at peak of our military imports coming from there. It's now down to about 45. But please don't forget that there is a limit to how much we can strengthen that military relationship, given that Russia itself is in the middle of a war. They need their own defense industry for themselves. Just getting the spare parts we need to maintain the stuff we've already bought from them might be enough to keep us in that relation. And I'm not sure we can ambitiously expect significant increases or diversification of new military items from Russia at a time when Russia is busy fighting a war itself. And the other problem we do have increasingly to be conscious of is China's, I can't say China's dominance, but let's say Russia's increasing dependence on China for a number of vital supplies, support, in a number of areas. So again, if you see a certain strategic concern with China, as I think you do, then you would appreciate that we can't be completely insensible to vulnerabilities to a supplier who in turn may be vulnerable to China. So all of these we have to think about. Finally, when it comes to the broader questions, I'm totally with you on that. We do need to bear everything in mind. There is a world in which everything is weaponized, including trade. For that matter, the whole IMEX scheme, which you talked about earlier, was seen as an Indian attempt to outflank the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. They're doing it on the road, we'll do it on the sea, kind of thing. And why not? I mean, everyone has to have their own strategic competition in mind. So I think you've said a lot of things we need to think about, but I think broadly speaking, your instincts are right, except that we have to calibrate them to today's realities of these countries.
Right.
You should get the lady have the last word on that.
Thank you so much. It was a great learning experience listening to you. I'm
Thank
Dr.
you.
Manjushri Chaudhary. Just one question. So when we're talking about Viksit Bharat, so is R&D important? If it is, do we need to make any change in the policies?
Oh yeah, R&D is vital, and there are lots of changes we need to see in India. Everything from investment. For example, we need to bring the percentage of GDP we spend in this country on research and development way above the present 0.6%, 0.64% or so that we have, which is pathetically low. The Chinese are about 2.5%. The Americans are about 3.5% of GDP on R&D. The Israelis are 5.5% of GDP on R&D. So we are simply not where we should be at 0.6. It's a joke. We really have to significantly put in the money. And I'll say to the private sector people here, the private sector has to step up. Look at any OECD country, 70 to 80% of research and development costs come from the private sector. In India, 64% is from the government in research. I mean, the government is finite. I mean, it has limited resources. It all comes from our taxes anyway. So why can't we get the private sector should have an interest in innovation and development of new products, etc., and they should find the money to put in. So those are just 2-3 steps. There's a lot more that needs to be done. What the government can do in terms of facilitating, incentivizing, and otherwise making it easier, that it should do. But some of the money will have to come from other sources, including the private sector. There is one more thing which we actually started off in UPA 2. We got Narayana Murthy ji to write a report on the industry-academia interface, which is so common in the West but is practically unknown here, where a company will say, hey, we have this glimmering of an idea. Can we pay a university to get graduate students to research it, see if it can become viable? And if it does, the university or whoever is involved will get a certain percentage of the royalties from when we make it and we make a profit on it. That kind of thing is very common in Silicon Valley, in the Raleigh-Durham Triangle, all of these places where American universities are concentrated, and there's also businesses in manufacturing. In India, we don't have that tradition. Yeah. We just don't have this, so we could actively encourage that. I'm sorry to say that report doesn't seem to have made much headway in government policy since it was written for us more than a dozen years ago. But I think the idea that we need much more interface between industry and academia is unquestionable. And we do need to see that coming up, including in R&D, but also in manufacturing and in every other way, so that also, I mean, I can tell you, for example, in my time, we actually passed a rule that we would not approve any new polytechnic that wasn't within a maximum 30-kilometer radius from a currently functioning industry. Because the whole logic was the students in a polytechnic have to be able to go and see some real stuff going on. Being taught by professors out of out-of-date textbooks without any real-world exposure was going to be of absolutely no use to come out with a polytechnic degree in those circumstances. And I think that's the sort of thing we've got to be much, much more conscious of. There's a lot happening in the real world that the education system needs to tie into. And that may also improve the employability of our graduates and our workers if there is a real world connection between what the marketplace really wants them to have and be able to do and what they're taught and equipped to be able to do.
Right.
Thanks all very much.
Mr. Tharoor, that was an excellent masterclass on how to balance foreign affairs, your military affairs, strategy, because all of that is very important for our national security and economic security. I'll end it there. I'll hand it over to Mr. Gupta and also Ms. Varidhi Singh for more. Mr. Mehta. My apologies.
No problem. Can I request Varidhi, before she proposes a formal vote of thanks, I would like to thank Shashi and Parikshit from the bottom of my heart. It was the most exciting and most educative session, and I'm sure all of you have enjoyed it. It will be available, part of it would be available on tape.
It's already online on your YouTube channels.
Oh, it's already online on your YouTube channel, so you will not miss anything. But with that, one must point to Rohit Bansal. Rohit, you represent one of the biggest industries in India.
The media.
No, he's with Mukesh Ambani. He's left media long ago. So get the Ambanis to start, investing 3% of their gross into R&D, and set an example. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Varidhi Singh, my colleague, who would be happy to propose a vote of thanks.
I am. I'm very happy to propose the vote of thanks for the evening. As we come to the close of this meaningful fundraising evening, it is my privilege to express gratitude on behalf of Kutch International to those who made this event truly impactful. First and foremost, our appreciation to Sir Dr. Tharoor, his thoughtful insights, eloquence, and unwavering commitment to, sustainable development, democratic values, have made this discussion truly insightful. And this has also added to the credibility of Kutch. His support has truly honored us, and we are thankful to that, sir. We are equally thankful to Mr. Viksit Bharat, whose engagement, clarity of thought, and thoughtful moderation has added immense value to the discussion. His ability to connect ideas and steer conversation with balance, and purpose has made this session engaging and impactful for all present. At this point of time, I would request our Secretary General to present a small token of appreciation. To Dr. Tharoor. And to Mr. Luthra.